as you know, as in the couple of articles, it was just, people say that, so the New Atlantis is all about religion, all about this sort of, Edenic version of pure Christianity. And, and the people just had to say, well, he was being satirical when he was talking about Christianity, but he was being real when he was talking about science, it's all bullshit. But that's the way they depict him, because Bacon becomes, through the Royal Society, the patron saint of hardcore science, because he said knowledge is power. But then you have, soon after that, you have Leibniz saying that Bacon wanted to put nature on the rack and torture her to get all her secrets, which is nothing what Bacon said. And of course, Leibniz and Newton, of course, they were fighting it out because they both claimed to have invented calculus.
Right.
And they probably invented it at the same time. But it's really Newton, of course, who develops the Newtonian physics and the mechanical world.
What was the actual thing that you read to me earlier? What he did say was quite beautiful.
So what Bacon does say on this page, go ahead, read.
Where is it?
Can you read?
Where?
It's right here in the italics and small print to make it tough.
It says, human knowledge and human power meet in one. For where the cause is not known, the effect cannot be produced. We can only command nature by obeying her.
That's important.
And that which in contemplation is as the cause is in operation as the rule. And that's from book 1, aphorism.
So commanding nature in order to obey her is a lot different than having power over nature. But that's what gets imputed to Bacon, and he becomes, for most people, the father of the hard scientists. Science abstracted from any sort of sacred underpinnings, and we obviously see where that has gone. Takes us back to the chemtrails. I mean, you can't. Who would come up with who has a sacred underpinning would come up with chemtrails, and that whole sort of thing.
Another little Bacon, a bit of Bacon here for us.
World's greatest creation scientists.
So Francis Yates. So then there's to try to come to terms with this question of Bacon and the Rosicrucians. Like I said, everyone says Bacon was this head Rosicrucians, but the whole thing is just up in the air because there is little to no actual evidence of really any Rosicrucians until the 1700s, until they started inventing the groups. Texts came out, no one claimed to write them, and it's just hard to say. But as you said, Bacon did not like Paracelsus, did not like Dee. I mean, there's no cross-referencing between Bacon and Dee, though they're obviously the huge minds of their time. There's next to nothing. Dee is obviously a little bit older. But what happens, Bacon really doesn't come into ascendancy, and he eventually becomes the Chancellor of England until James is crowned. James does not like Dee, does not like alchemy, does not like magic in any form. Bacon has to play up to James, who follows Queen Elizabeth, and basically has to poo-poo anything magical. And Paracelsus is part of that. Copernicus, he rejected the Copernican heliocentric theory. So he pulls himself away from the whole alchemical hermetic tradition, the whole as above so below, how everything is connected. I mean, that's the way. In other words, so here's a question for you, because you do this all the time. You're doing astrology every day. You're talking about how different planets and different constellations have an effect on the human life. But the question is, what is the mechanism of that, right?
Yeah, that's one of the first things that people ask. It's like, well, how does this all work? And I think you could probably sit down with 10 different astrologers and they may be able to agree on maybe one or two things and then not agree on about another three or four. I mean, so there's like this idea that the planets themselves have kind of a geocosmic energy that's associated with it. They represent spheres of consciousness, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's one version of how it all works. Another version of how it all works is that there is actual physical emanations that come out of the planets themselves. We've seen this to be true based on the perturbations of fields when planets are discovered. So that part is true. How much of it is true in terms of its distance? Like how much actual perturbatory energy does Pluto have when it's so far away? I don't know. I can't answer that question. Then there's this idea that we have invested so much in the system itself, that the system has become this kind of living grid, this matrix, and it's animated by our own intention. That's another version. I mean, and I think all of these are somewhat valid to some degree, but I would say if you wanted to go in for the kind of the straight model, I would say that the spheres themselves are imbued with the geocosmic energy, that they have vibration, that they have a type of consciousness associated with them, and even historically, that they have played roles at certain points in time. Like, for instance, there's a theory that Saturn was once the sun in our solar system, right?
Right, and I think Steiner has something like that too.
Yeah,
calls it old sun or something like that, right? Old Saturn.
Old Saturn.
Yeah.
It became the black sun, right? And this is where we get the sort of this whole myth of the black sun and the rebirth of the black sun vis-a-vis the Saturn cube or the black cube that's here on the planet. So I mean, I tend to think that that's how it works. And there's also, if you go down sort of the Jungian or the archetypal realm, that these symbols and the images and the archetypes themselves have a resonant and mythopoetic meaning if they line up in a certain way at a certain time in your life, that they actually have some resonance. And look, I'm not sitting here to get on my throne and defend astrology, and because a lot of people think it's bullshit, but I've been doing this for 10 years now, and I've seen worked with my self-predictive models, and even in many instances in my own life, tracking what's going on. And trust me, I mean, I've had transits in my life which, it's like, well, if it happens, it happens. And quite frankly, I hope it really doesn't happen. I'm not going to give it a lot of energy. And next thing you know, I'm in the midst of this whirlwind of this transit. And so there's certainly a lot going on there. And for me, it's a way for us to untangle our persona and our ego. And so that ultimately we become closer to this kind of inherent pattern that's inside of ourselves. And that inherent pattern is the way that we most express the sort of the divine nature of who we are. And when we do that, then our lives are better, other people's lives are better, and the life of the planet is better because we're living in alignment, right? Mm-hmm. So to me, the actual mechanism of the chart is fascinating. It's totally fascinating. And of course, I'm just dealing with one version, and there are a lot of different versions out there in terms of people reading either whole signs or whole houses or whatever. And that's just kind of, there's sidereal, there's pope, there's
and Vedic,
so many ways to interpret this stuff, right? But I would say by and large, just to, again, filter it down, that what we're dealing with are geocosmic forces that have a vibrational relationship at a very deep level. Yeah. And even Edgar Cayce, not that Cayce is the end all and be all and the arbiter of how reality exists, but Cayce talks about how these planets really represent sort of states of consciousness that we can actually go to in between lifetimes and kind of experience lessons there. So that's actually a pretty interesting concept, which I think, it's to me, it's fascinating. Anyway, we could talk about astrology for a long time, but but that's the answer to the question. Well,
and that speaks to the connection between the microcosm and the macrocosm. Mm-hmm. Because unless it's within us, how could it affect us from without us? Unless there's a unity between the two.
Absolutely. And I think that's really well put, because I mean, how does it function? How does it work? There's got to be a connection between the two. Absolutely.
Yeah, if we're just dependent on Newtonian physics, how could it work? Even though Newton was an astrologer, obviously Dee was an astrologer. He was the court astrologer for Elizabeth, and these people did it. Yeah, because otherwise you're stuck with saying, well, the constellation looks like something from us, but it's not like they're flat against the surface, somewhere, from someplace out in space, they would appear completely
entirely different. The configuration.
So it's all it's all from our perspective, just like the moon and the sun, how is it that they're exactly the same size from our perspective? A little weird, it's just
it is definitely weird. I mean, I do think that the sun is a lot closer than we've been led to believe, to be honest. That's my 2 cents around the whole thing. Hey, do you want to talk about the New Atlantis? You want to drop into that?
Yeah, we can drop into the New Atlantis, and I just want to also just say that Bacon was involved in establishing the Virginia colony. He does have an actual impact in America. He's involved in the founding of Newfoundland, and then in the Carolinas. It was Bacon, Locke, and Newton were Jefferson's 3 favorites. I just found my note on that. And Bacon's half brother comes to America, to Jamestown in 1635, and I do, and I think we have at least another show in us for sort of Rosicrucian alchemical settlements in the 1600s in America, because they're fascinating and completely not known about.
You know what I just realized? Francis Bacon, that's Frank, right?
Right.
And what do we call hot dogs? We call them Franks.
Franks, hot dogs and bacon.
There you go. Robert's on something.
Frankenfurter.
So we have Franks and we have Bacon. What's up with that?
And
Francophiles.
And what do you call the pigs in a blanket, right?
There you go.
Little hot dogs wrapped in bacon, because hot dogs aren't quite bad enough for you.
So let's visit the New Atlantis.
So New Atlantis. So this is a work written, and it's an unfinished work found on pretty much by his secretary, amongst his papers after he dies in 1626. 1627, it gets published along with another work of philosophy of Bacon's, and I guess we don't really have enough time to go in through the whole thing, but basically a ship leaves Peru. It's lost out in the ocean. It's
headed for China.
It's headed for China, so it's on the.
And it's a terrible storm. It's not just lost.
Yeah,
there's a terrible storm, and there's a lot of praying going on.
Right
on the ship.
So,
right?
Yes, so this is it. So so there, and it has again there's another biblical echo, because they're lost. Everything's chaotic, right? It's like the creation story. Chaos is on the waters are stilled, and then boom, what's the first creation is land. Then they see land. All right, so they come upon the land. So it's sort of like a recapitulation of the creation story, and there's a lot of that in this. And they do a lot of praying. The land appears. They encounter. They find a port. Someone comes out from the city, and then they so they're kind of taken care of. There's 51 sailors, 1706. Which is exactly a third. I don't know what that has to do with anything, but that's just the way that plays out.
Sick to the point of
death. So they're very sick on the ship, so the guy doesn't want to call on the ship. But anyway, they're given a place on land in this place called Ben Salem.
Yes, it's Ben Salem or Ben Salem, right?
Or Ben Salem, which Ben means son, so you can say the son of peace. Mm-hmm. So that makes sense, because what is Bacon talking about? He's talking about a new Atlantis, which is obviously the title, but the new Atlantis is also the New Jerusalem.
Right.
So the New Jerusalem, which it gets back to, because there's so much working with the Book of Revelations, things like that. So they're not only just instituting, and gets back to Dee, who's kind of doing the same thing. They want to reestablish this sort of connection to the Edenic state, but anew. So it's the New Jerusalem, the new Atlantis, and all that.